that we can be together. Thankful Lee is well enough to be with us, and others as well. In our daily Bible readings, we've got a lot to cover, at least I'm going to try to cover this morning. And in our readings, we are in 1 Kings 21 through 2 Kings 5. 1 Kings 21 through 2 Kings 5. I've just got a lot of paperwork up here. 1 Kings, we have, who is king in Israel during these days? Ahab, yes. And Ahab in chapter 21 requests that he has somebody's vineyard. Who is it? Naboth. And what happens?
He didn't want to give it up.
Didn't want to give it up. Those are all, tribal and family possessions. He had no right to it. So what happens? What does Ahab have done? He pouted, and then his wife ends up
fought witness against him and had him killed.
Exactly. And Elijah denounces that, and there's again a case where he, as well as his wife, were responsible for, as Solomon said in Proverbs, shedding innocent blood. 6 things the Lord hates, yea, 7 are an abomination to him. And one of those things is to shed innocent blood. And he's guilty of that. We have Ahab going against Syria in chapter 22, a prophecy from Micaiah. And then in chapter 20, that's the end of 22, Ahaziah becomes king, and that continues on into 2 Kings. Ahaziah sends messengers in 2 Kings 1 to the prophet. Who is the prophet at this point? Elijah. And we learn a little bit about the dress. We've already learned about how Elijah lived off the land earlier in 1 Kings 17. But now we learn a little bit more about his dress. And so as the messenger goes and comes to Elijah and warns him, he goes back to Ahaziah, and Ahaziah says, well, now what kind of clothes, well, verse 7 of chapter 1, what manner of man was he that came to meet you, told you these words? They answered, he was what? Hairy, girt with a leather belt or leather girdle, and Ahaziah exclaims, it's Elijah the Tishbite. And actually Elijah was warning Ahaziah through him. And it ends up that Elijah says he's going to die. And how did he die? Would he fall? That's right, fell through the lattice work. And then in chapter 2, what happens to Elijah? He's taken up into heaven. Elijah is one of 2 who did not experience what? Death. Who is the other? Enoch. Right. And in both cases, they're both living during a time of terrible iniquity going on in the world. And perhaps that had something to do with it, that they themselves were extremely faithful. In chapter 2, well, we mentioned that, chapter 3, Elisha's successor is who? Elisha, yes. If you have a problem remembering which comes first, just think J comes before S in the alphabet. Elijah, Elisha. That's an easy way to remember. If you probably don't have any trouble like that. In chapter 4, Elisha shows his similar ability to work miracles by causing a certain woman who had a problem. What was her problem? She's about to go what? What was that, David?
Couldn't pay her bills.
That's right, couldn't pay her bills. She had practically nothing. And he increased what? The oil. The oil is increased. And then in chapter 5, perhaps one of the more notorious, and I don't mean that in a good way, maybe that's a bad word for it, but more popular stories is Elisha is able to heal somebody. Who is it? Naaman. What was Naaman ethnically? The Syrian. And Syria was a friend to Israel. True or false? No, false. And Jesus would use Naaman. We've already covered that in Matthew, the 11th chapter. Jesus would say there were a number of widows during the days of Elisha, but to none were sent except Elisha. And then there were a number of lepers during the days of Elisha, but to none was Elisha sent except Naaman the Syrian. That would mean he was likely a what? Jew or Gentile? Gentile. And so God's interest in Gentiles was just as much as the Jews, for that matter. So we have Naaman's healing in chapter 5. I heard on tape, I didn't actually hear it live because he died before I was even a Christian, I think. But Brother Fort E. Wallace was a very extremely popular preacher, very powerful preacher for a number of years. His debates on premillennialism are worth the price of whatever book you have on that. The Neil Wallace discussion was good. And anyway, Brother Wallace had a tremendous lesson that I heard, about an hour and a half long, on an Old Testament example of conversion. And he used Naaman, the Syrian, and he just went through it, and then of course showed the parallels from Naaman dipping in the Jordan to baptism. And just a powerful lesson. All right, comment or question? Anybody? All right, let's go back. Let's go to our life of Christ. We're in Matthew 9, Mark 5, Luke 8, the parallel passages that deal with Jesus now going back across the sea from where he was. We'll get to that in just a minute. He was over on the we would say the northeastern coast of the Gerasenes or Gadara. And what has he just done that we studied about Wednesday night and partly last Sunday? They cast out demons. How many men were there? 2. Mark and Luke mentioned 1, but Matthew 2. Maybe Mark and Luke mentioned the more notorious of the 2. And they were just, but let's go back to here where we are on slide number 1. Jonathan, we've got in the overall outline, years of preparation, about 30. Then the beginning ministry, which is down in the Judean area. And then John is in prison. Jesus sees a need to go north, and so he does. And then eventually he makes Capernaum his headquarters for the better part of 2 years in this great Galilean ministry. And I wanted to go, let's see, I've got it here. So many things going on that we've discussed. The healing of and I want to come back to this in just a moment. He's likely, as he goes back across over in Capernaum, and when he first goes to Galilee, this nobleman comes to Jesus in Cana, but he actually heals the nobleman's son who is in Capernaum. Yeah, and so we're going to come back to Capernaum again. He's rejected at Nazareth, moves to Capernaum and makes that his own city. Calls Peter, Andrew, James, and John. Teaches in the synagogue on the Sabbath. And then the healing on the Sabbath is what gets him in hot water with some of the religious leaders. He tours Galilee, heals lepers, a paralytic, calls Matthew. Then Matthew has a feast for Jesus. He heals a lame man, as in John 5. Then he defends his disciples for plucking grain on the Sabbath when the Pharisees condemned them. And then on another Sabbath day, he heals a man with a withered hand, and they want to kill him. Remember, is it good? Is it right to do good on the Sabbath or to do evil? And they reasoned. He had them, in other words, and they were wanting to kill him. So he withdraws from his enemies, and that fulfilled the passage of Scripture. And then after a night of prayer, he selects the 12. Then we have the Sermon on the Mount. And following that, Matthew and Luke with the centurion's servant. And there again, the centurion's servant was in the city of. The centurion himself was in the city of. If you say it, you'll be right. I know you're thinking it, David. Guess. Capernaum. You remember all those slides I showed with the pictures of Capernaum and the synagogue and the Jews, the elders who came to Jesus said, this centurion's a good man. He even built our synagogue. You remember that? And then he raises the widow's son. I was thinking this morning, I don't have this in the notes, but I was thinking this morning about the nobleman's son and then the centurion who was well respected by the Jews. All that's in Capernaum. And then Jairus is a ruler there of the synagogue. And you think they all knew each other, likely. And anyway, Jesus' estimate of John, the woes, and we'll come back to this. Woe unto thee, Chorazin, woe unto thee, Bethsaida. And then thou, Capernaum, those three cities that are in the kind of at the in the arch part of the Sea of Galilee that we'll see in just a minute. And so then he attends the feast given by Simon, the second tour in Luke 8, and then he's accused of casting out demons by Beelzebub when he performed that triple cure. The scribes and Pharisees that he denounces ask for a sign from heaven, and then his mother and brothers desire to see him, and he says, my mother and my brothers are those who do the will of God. And then the parables, 8 or 9, depending on how you look at it. And then he explains the cost of discipleship. A fellow said, a scribe came and said, Lord, I'll follow you. Let me follow you. I'll follow you. And he said, quote, exactly. If you follow me, we're not going to go have a certain place. Another one said, I'll follow you, but first, let me first go bury my father. And he said, let the dead bury their own dead. Yeah. And so that's the cost of discipleship. Then he goes across, then he gets in the boat, and as they are going in an eastward direction, he falls asleep, a storm brews. They come to him, Master, don't you care that we perish? He says, peace, be still, the wind stopped, the sea is calm, and they marvel. Then he goes across to the area of the Gerasenes, and then we find that he cast out these Gerasene demoniacs as we studied Wednesday night. Now, the next thing that we're studying is recorded in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. Matthew 9, Mark 5, and Luke 8. And Jairus' daughter, is raised from the dead, and the healing of a woman with the issue of blood. Notice the Waldrons in the material mentioned the healing of Jairus' daughter when she actually died, but then he heals the woman with the issue of blood. So that's where we are right now in our study. Now, we've been over here in Gergesa. Remember, he was over in Capernaum. He gave that busy day in his life. Almost everything was done in Capernaum. And then the parables, and then somebody comes up, can I follow you? Let me follow you. And he says what we've already discussed. So he goes to Gergesa. And then we have the casting out of the two demoniacs. And then one of them says, Lord, I want to go with you. And he says, no, just go back and tell your people. And so he goes through all the area of Decapolis, 10 cities in this area, Greek primarily. And so now Jesus and the apostles have left to go back across the other side. I wanted to review the pictures because I've doctored a couple here. This is looking from over in Gergesa, just looking up to the left or kind of to the south, and noticing the hills, the caves there, that in which some of them, perhaps the two demoniacs could have indwelled. And then that's looking downhill from Cursa or the Gadarenes in toward the Sea of Galilee, right where possibly those that herd of swine. How many of the swine were there? About 2,000. A lot of them went into the deep and perished. And so we have then looking toward the south, where it empties into the into the Jordan River. Over here would be Tiberias. Over here would be Capernaum. And way over here would be Bethsaida. Bethsaida, or Chorazin, and Bethsaida would be a little bit farther over here. Bethsaida, Chorazin, Capernaum. Those three cities that Jesus, remember, gave the woe unto you, Chorazin. Woe unto thee, Bethsaida. For if the works done in Tyre and Sidon were done in you, they would have repented long ago. And thou, Capernaum, do you think you will be exalted unto heaven? So these are the cities. In fact, Matthew says where he had done most of his mighty works. And we're going to see more here right now. Now here's what I wanted to doctor a little. Jesus is somewhere over here, likely 3.5 miles across. It doesn't look like it, but it's a longer ways than it looks. He crosses back from Gergesa to the other side, likely back to Capernaum, where the multitudes were gathered, waiting and welcoming. And let's read those two passages. Mark 5:21, Patty, David, Luke 8, verse 40. And those will start, at least in Mark and Luke's account, that will start our section here. Mark 5, verse 21. Patty?
Now when Jesus had crossed over again by boat to the other side, a great multitude gathered to him, and he was by the sea.
All right, and David, read the parallel in Luke 8.
So it was when Jesus returned that the multitude welcomed him, for they were all waiting for him.
Okay, so now remember, it could have been the next day. You know, we had this long day in Jesus' life, you know, that one event after another that we already pointed out. And evidently, he spent the night over there in the area of the Gergesa, and then he comes across, and they're waiting on him. Evidently, maybe word travels that they see something afar, and so he's going across from here over to there. And then again, this is basically what's happening, and I think it helps us to put it together geographically what's happening in the narrative. He crosses back from Gergesa to the other side, likely back to Capernaum. All right, with that in mind, let's go through these passages and then answer our questions, and we'll see how we do. Let's go to Mark's account first, Mark 5, and we're going to, they're actually in this event, in this section of Scripture, how many, maybe we could say distinct events are there? 1, 2, 3. There are two distinct events. As Jesus is there, there's multitudes around him, and if you can just picture this ruler of the synagogue comes to Jesus, and he falls down at his feet, and he beseeches, the word beseech, to beg, implore. My daughter, and she's my only daughter. She's 12 years old. In fact, when I left her, she was dying. She's sick. Please come and lay your hands on her that she may be healed. So Jesus, obviously the fellow has faith, and we'll come to that in a minute. So Jesus starts walking. And remember, according to the accounts here, it's almost like it used to be at Legion Field when Alabama played somebody, and you're going through the turnstiles, you know, you kind of like this. Y'all remember that, some of you? It's in the crowds, or when you're going out right after a game, and you're kind of getting jostled, you know. There are just so many thousands of people just right there at you. Evidently, that was what it was like with Jesus. They're just trying to get right on him. And so as he's walking with Jairus, there's a woman who comes up from behind him. And she's been thinking within herself, if I could but touch the what? The hem or the border of his garment, I could be healed. Well, she had a real problem. She had a chronic hemorrhage for how long? 12 years. Which made her ceremonially what? All the time? Unclean. Now, in a sense, it would have been wrong for her. A ruler would have gotten after her if she had tried to touch Jesus, because anyone who was in that condition, if they touched another person, that made that other person unclean as well. So, but anyway, she comes up from behind and she touches him. And Jesus said, who touched me? And the apostle said, Lord, look at this multitude. Everybody's been touching you. How can you say, who touched you? I perceive that power has gone out from me. And so she is with fear and trembling, and she comes up And she tells him the same thing she'd been thinking. I just thought if I could just touch the hem of your garment, I would be made whole. So he turns around and he says, daughter, evidently a daughter of Israel, daughter of Abraham, a Jew, daughter, your faith has made you whole, well. And so then he continues on, and he gets to the area there of Jairus' house, and he hears these, what instrument was it, Landon, that they're playing? You have them in your band. I know you know. Anybody? Flute. They're playing flutes. And evidently funeral dirges, and they're women who are wailing and weeping. And Jesus said she's just a what? She's just asleep. Oh, they laughed him to scorn. They scornfully laughed at him, is the idea behind it. And so Jesus takes with him Peter, James, and John. And who else? The mother and the father. And they leave the crowd. They go into the room where the daughter is. And Jesus basically says, it's time to get up. Talitha Kumai, Aramaic for damsel, I say unto thee, arise. And what happens? She immediately gets up. I found it interesting that Aramaic word is like, hey, it's time to get up. It's like you would say to a dog, to a girl, or to a guy, a child, hey, it's morning, let's get up, let's get up. And she immediately gets up, and then Jesus says, give her something to eat. And so, as a result of all this, the multitudes are what? Completely, what's that, Patty? Amazed. They're completely astounded. All right, so let's start now. I just kind of told you the story, but let's read it for ourselves. Mark 5, verse 25 through 34 deals with Jesus beginning to go, and then the woman coming up to him and who has the issue or the hemorrhage of blood, and he heals her. And then in 35 through the end is actually when he goes to Jairus' house and raises the daughter from the dead. Okay, let's see. Paula, why don't you read 25 through 34? Kirsten, 35 through the end. All right?
And a certain woman which had an issue of blood 12 years, and had suffered many things of many physicians, and had spent all that she had, and was nothing better, but rather grew worse. When she heard of Jesus, came in the press behind and touched his garment, for she said, if I may touch but his clothes, I will be whole. And straightway the fountain of her blood was dried up, and she felt in her body that she was healed of that plague. And Jesus, immediately knowing in himself that virtue had gone out of him, turned about in the press and said, who touched my clothes? And his disciples said unto him, thou seest the multitude thronging thee, and sayest thou, who touched me? And he looked around about to see her that had done this thing. The woman, fearing and trembling, knowing what was done in her, came and fell down before him and told him all the truth. And he said unto her, daughter, thy faith hath made thee whole. Go in peace and be whole of thy faith.
All right. What does he commend about her? Her faith. But it wasn't faith only. Her faith had led her to obviously push herself through the crowd, which if people knew she had been an unclean ceremonial, that had been a big thing for her to do. But she's weaving her way. Just picture it for yourself. She's weaving her way, maybe nudging, putting her elbow up, just kind of, and then she touches it. And then all of a sudden she's well. And then Jesus asks the question. All right, let's keep reading, and then we'll go into more detail. 35 through the end, Kirsten.
While he was still speaking, there came from the ruler's house some who said, your daughter is dead. Why trouble the teacher any further? But overhearing what they said, Jesus said to the ruler of the synagogue, do not fear, only believe. And he had entered, he said to them, "Why are you making a commotion and weeping? The child is not dead, but sleeping." And they laughed at him, but he put them all outside and took the child's father and mother and those who were with him and went in where the child was. Taking her by the hand, he said to her, "Talitha cumi," which means, "Little girl, I say to you, arise." And immediately the girl got up and began walking, for she was 12 years of age. And they were immediately overcome with amazement. He strictly charged them that no one should know this, and told them to give her something to eat.
All right, let's turn to Matthew's account, Matthew 9. Matthew 9, verse 18 through 26. 18 through 26. Brother Charlie, if you would. Matthew 9, 18 through 26.
So while he was saying these things to them, the synagogue preacher came and bowed down before him and said, "My daughter has just died, but come and lay your hand on her so she will live." Jesus got up and began following him, and so did his disciples. And a woman had been suffering from a hemorrhaging for 12 years came up behind him and touched the fringe of his cloak. For she was saying to herself, "If I only touch his garment, I will get well." But Jesus turned and seeing her said, "Daughter, take courage. Your faith has made you well." At once the woman was made well. How far do you go?
Yeah, 26.
Then Jesus says, "Come into the official's house, and saw the flute players and a crowd of noise of this sort. He said, 'Leave, the girl has not died, but is sleeping.' And they began laughing at him. But when the crowd had been sent away, he entered and took her by the hand. The girl got up, and the news spread throughout all the land.
All right, good. Now let's go to Luke's account. Luke 8. And this should be, instead of 41 as I have on the notes, it should be 40. Luke 8, verse 40. If you want to correct that in your notes, 40 through 56. Luke 8, 40 through 56. Landon, why don't you read 40 through 48?
Now when Jesus returned, the crowd welcomed him, for they were all waiting for him. And there came a man named Jairus, who was ruler of the synagogue. And falling at Jesus' feet, he implored him to come to his house. For he had only one daughter, about 12 years of age, and she was dying. As Jesus went, the people pressed around him. And there was a woman who had a discharge of blood for 12 years. And though she had spent all her living on physicians, she could not be healed by anyone. She came up behind him and touched the fringe of his garment, and immediately her discharge of blood ceased. And Jesus said, "Who is that touched me?" When all denied it, Peter said, "Master, the crowd surround you and are pressing in on you." But Jesus said, "Someone touched me, for I perceive that the power has gone out from me." And when the woman saw that she was not hidden, she came trembling, and falling down before him, declared in the presence of all the people why she had touched him, and how she had been immediately healed. And he said to her, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace."
All right, so we have the starting with Jairus, and then the woman comes, he heals her, and now he gets to the house of Jairus, where the daughter is. Cooper, if you would, 49 through the end.
While he was still speaking, someone came from the house of the synagogue official, saying, "Your daughter has died. Do not trouble the teacher anymore." But when Jesus heard this, he responded to him, "Do not be afraid any longer. Only believe, and she will be made well." When he came to the house, he did not allow anyone to enter with him except Peter, John, and James, and the girl's father and mother. Now they were all weeping and mourning for her, but he said, "Stop weeping, for she has not died, but is asleep." And they began laughing at him, knowing that she had died. He, however, took her by the hand and spoke forcefully, saying, "Child, arise." And her spirit returned, and she got up immediately, and he ordered that something be given to her to eat. Her parents were amazed, but he instructed them to not tell anyone.
Okay, yeah, don't tell anybody. Several ideas on this. Let's answer some of our questions, and we'll probably digress into some excursions here. These passages, number one, record two miracles. One is Jesus was going to the house of Jairus to raise his daughter. Of what was this man a ruler? That's a gimme. A synagogue, or the synagogue. This man's name is not mentioned in Matthew. Is it in Mark? Yes. Luke? Yes. It's Mark 5:22, Luke 8:41. Holding such a position as he did, what did Jairus do which would have been considered a lowly act? What was that? That's exactly right, Paula. He comes to Jesus and he falls down at his feet. In Matthew's account, it says he worshipped him. That's an interesting idea. The word for worship literally means to kiss the hand toward. And it's like, well, we even have the Pope put out his hand and somebody kisses his ring, you know. Or here's a queen, and she puts out her hand, and a knight comes and he kisses the hand. It's an act of adoration. He fell down, and it reminds us of Psalm 95. Oh, come, let us worship and bow down. Let us kneel before the Lord our Maker. So there are synonyms here of bowing down and in the equivalent of worship. There's also the sense of humility that's a part of that. That I'm bowing, I'm prostrating myself before you in humble submission and in humility. And then he's beseeching, he's asking. Not only is the adoration and the worship, but there's the beseech, the begging. I've got my daughter and I left her dying. Please come. And so you've got two things. I'll make a point of this on the notes in a moment. But there are two major ideas, I think, that are encapsulated in this idea that in his falling down, he understands Jesus' deity. And he understands that Jesus is able to do something with her. And then he's showing his own belief in that and his own humility. So you've got at least two big ideas that are there. For a ruler of the synagogue to do that would have been that he said he put something in his back pocket. What am I thinking about?
Pride.
His pride. Exactly right, David. A man who's a ruler among the Jews, a leader, he's not going to do that to another ordinary man. But Jesus is not any ordinary man, and he understands that. And so he puts what one could consider his pride behind him. So he fell down. The answer to number 3, he fell down at Jesus' feet and besought or begged him. In Matthew 9:18, he worshipped him and begged him. And number 4, however, this act indicated his what in the Lord? His great what? His great faith. In fact, Jesus commented on his faith. He had faith in Jesus' ability to heal his daughter, and humility on his part. What did he ask Jesus to do? That's right. Come to my house, lay your hands on her that she can be healed. Matthew 9:19 says, Jesus arose and followed him. As he proceeded to Jairus' house, Jesus healed another person. And this is where I almost observed the Passover on all this. I'm going to do better on put some more questions and notes here. Describe how it occurred. All right, we've already talked about it. A woman comes up to him and touches him. And now remember, what's the crowd like? What's the crowd doing? It's thronging. In fact, one translation says crushing in. So she has to work her way through, and she's just able to touch the what of his garment? The hem or the border of it, just a small portion of it. And then immediately she is healed. This chronic hemorrhage ceases, and then Jesus says, or asks, who touched me? Yeah.
Philip, did you not see how this woman here was not going to be denied?
Yes.
She knew this is her last shot.
Yes. And, it says she spent all that she had on physicians and was worse,
You know, you've been in this crowd, and it's hard to keep up with somebody that you're with in a crowd like that. And here's a woman that's fighting all these people just to get to where she can touch his garment.
Yes. I think it interesting, Brother McGarvey made a point let's see if I can find it real quickly here, that the physicians of the first century were very similar to the medicine men among the North American Indians. I thought that was pretty neat. That I'll find it here. But anyway, she had spent all she had, and not only had she not gotten any better, she gotten worse. And so, like you said, here's a case here where this is her last chance. Here it is. Medicine was not a science in that day. Diseases were not cured by medicine, but were exorcised by charms. That's E-X-O-R-C-I-S-E-D, not E-X-E-R. The physician of Galilee in that age did not differ very widely from the medicine man of the North American Indians. One in easy circumstances could readily spend all during 12 years of doctoring with such leeches. Don't you love it? With such leeches. I just think that's, that's so picturesque. All right, let's see, number 7. When Jesus arrived at the ruler's house, what was going on? What was that, Paula?
They were crying,
They-
they were confused.
Good. Confused, a tumult, confusion. Many were weeping and wailing, and they were playing the flutes and the funeral dirges. You remember back, we studied in Matthew 11 rather, where they rejected Jesus and they rejected John as well. And remember when Jesus said, "How shall I liken this generation? Oh, it's like children playing in the marketplace, saying, we piped or we played the flute and you did not dance. Or we wailed and you did not mourn." So you've got all these ideas of the emotions and people who would actually exacerbate the problem through their own mourning. All right, number 8. Who were the only ones Jesus took with him into the dead girl's room? Who?
Mother and father, Peter, James, John.
Good. Mother, father, Peter, James, and John. Likely because since there was such a throng of people, that he would keep it to the bare minimum of people so they would know, word would get out. And that's what eventually, and of course he's telling people to keep it down low right now, but word is going to get out anyway. We answered number 9 already. How old was the girl Jesus raised from the dead? 12. And did she have any brothers or sisters? No. Now, think. Does that remind you of another one raised from the dead? Well, there are only 2 others. That Lazarus, and we know.
Lady's son.
Yeah, the widow at Nain had a son, and he was her only son, and she was a widow. And so you've got the only son of the widow of Nain, and now the only daughter of the ruler of the synagogue here, Jairus.
I wonder if there could be a comparison with Jesus being the only son also.
I'm sorry, what was that?
If you could make a comparison with Jesus being the only son also, he was raised.
Yeah.
Just-
I hadn't thought
just
about it.
similarities.
Yeah.
That just popped in my head.
Yeah, that's right. I think I know it's in the case with the widow's son there in Luke 7 that it looks like it's stated based on. It looks like the record is given and based on Jesus' response, he had compassion on her because of her situation there.
Is there anywhere that we read about a woman requesting to be healed?
About her requesting?
Requesting.
No.
She never asked to be healed.
No, I think she just thought, if I can just touch him, that's all it takes, which really is another expression of great faith on her part. Yeah. Seriously, Jesus had a lot of compassion with these people who were, limited. Maybe is the best word I can think of. Had a really about the closest friend I suppose I've had in years gone by to pass away Friday evening. Passed away here at UAB, but he's from Athens. And his wife and he had one daughter. She's at Huntsville. and she has a husband and some kids. But the widow, I was talking to the son-in-law at length last night, and the widow is really, really down. She's been caring for people for 40 years. Her husband's father, he was an only son. She cared for him, and then for her own mother, her own dad, and then for her husband's father. For her husband's mother-in-law. And she was a real pain to deal with. And then she died, and then her husband has had all kinds of, my friend has had all kinds of problems. He had bullous pemphigoid. It's a very rare skin disease. And it affected Larry on the bottoms of his feet. He was on his feet all day with work. It would get little lesions on his hands. Anyway, he developed that when we were still in Athens. But it just got worse. He was on prednisone a lot. I'm giving you a lot of facts you don't need to know, I know that. But he was on prednisone, and it made his bones brittle, and he fell a couple of weeks. Well, he fell on Easter Sunday, whatever day that was. And had surgery, broke his leg, had surgery, and then he developed pneumonia, and pneumonia killed him. And in talking with the son-in-law last night, she has been so down. I mean, it's like she's 71 years old, and it's almost like her whole 40 years of her life has been caring for one, and she feels like, and then the daughter, the only daughter, my friend told me, she feels like she's almost lost both of her parents because the mother is just really ailing with her own health. That is the widow now of my friend. Anyway, long story short, you can't help but when people don't have much family and things like that happen, it seems like the Lord had a special place in his heart for people like that. The widow at Nain, and Jairus here with his only daughter. Let's see. Jesus' fame spread abroad in spite of what? Number 10.
Request not to say.
Yes, request not that it be told. Some may wonder why Jesus asked who touched him as if he might not know. Jesus was not asking for information, but used the question as a means of imparting it. You could almost summarize and say Jesus did not ask for information, but to give it. And it was giving to the ones who were surrounding. Very similar to Genesis 4. You remember when Cain killed Abel, God asked Cain, "Where is your brother Abel?" Is it that God didn't know? That was to call attention to Abel, that he knew, God knew. And he said, the blood of your brother cries up from the ground. I know what you've done, and you need to know that. Anyway, it's the same case, same principle here. Jesus is not asking for information. I don't know who touched me. Who in the world could that have been? No, he knew exactly. But he's wanting the crowd to know because she had tried to do it, not publicly, but privately. Just touch him and kind of be done with it. Jesus' miracles were always to establish faith in the hearts of witnesses. In the case of the woman, the miracle was secretly done, so Jesus made the case public in order to help others believe that he was God's son. In the case of Jairus' daughter, multitudes were around to see what was done and would have believed based on their own observations. Jesus told the family not to spread that news in order that crowds would not throng him any further than they already were. This will be done on other occasions. Remember that his popularity was great, and yet there was growing opposition from religious leaders. This could have caused a crisis before Jesus completed his ministry, hence the reason for such a request. All right, the time is shot. About, I just want to stop. I had too many lessons that I wanted to think about. I'll just stop. Any comment or question? Wonderful. If you go back to Matthew's account, Matthew 7 ends with after the Sermon on the Mount, they were amazed. The multitudes were amazed because he was one who taught as having authority, not as the scribes. And then chapters 8 and 9 of Matthew, Matthew being arranged more topically than chronologically, Matthew 8 and 9 record about 10 different miracles, and all of them indicate Jesus' complete power over disease, even death, nature, everything. And so that's kind of where we are. Thank you for your help, guys.